Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Spratt from Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. I want to remind everyone that the Off the Charts Football Podcast is presented to you by FantasyInsiders.com, which is your source for daily fantasy sports content. Their slogan is Accuracy Matters, and it shows as they've won the daily fantasy accuracy competition for the last 3 years. If you're serious about DFS or want to become serious, check out FantasyInsiders.com for free educational content and premium memberships. Aaron, it feels like it's been forever, but last Sunday in the early 1 o'clock games, there was a really compelling game between the Steelers and the Cardinals. And actually on FootballOutsiders.com, there's some really good content from you explaining why the Cardinals are still the number one DVOA team despite losing to the Steelers. But I think today would be really good for us to talk a little bit more about the Steelers, who maybe have exceeded expectations since losing Ben Roethlisberger, which was something that I think we all thought might be devastating to their chances. Now, the reason I say that is because before the season began, in the Football Outsiders Almanac, you guys projected the Steelers to be the number 8 DVOA team, so obviously on the short list of competitive teams. But they were projected to be third offensive team and 28th defensive team in DVOA. And it hasn't quite played out that way. And so I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit about why they've been able to hang in there with Michael Vick and more recently Landry Jones.
Yeah, we really haven't been talking about the Steelers much, have we? We're talking about the Cardinals a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like the Cardinals have gotten a lot of attention, but the Steelers, if you consider how they're playing without Roethlisberger, maybe need to get a little bit more attention because when he comes back, they're going to take a step forward. And they're actually sixth in DVOA through 6 weeks, which is pretty darn impressive considering that we all thought they had this terrible defense before the season, and they lost their starting quarterback for half the year so far. But everything's played better than expected, I think, including the backup quarterbacks, right? So their offense is 5th in the league so far. The defense is actually average, 14th, and the special teams have been average, ranking 16th. And for defense, that's a real improvement over what we expected. And for special teams, I think that ranking may shock people because of all of the field goal problems they've had, but it shows that the rest of the special teams have played really well.
Yeah. Let's start with the offense and some of the specifics there first. You mentioned that the backup quarterbacks have been better than expected. I think that's something that pretty much everyone who's watched those games can tell, especially with all the other backup quarterbacks having to play this year because of just the ton of quarterback injuries. We've seen Vick and Jones make plays and be fairly effective, and at least in Vick's case, not turn the ball over quite as much as he had in previous years. So we sort of see that coming. From the running game perspective, Roethlisberger left right around the time Le'Veon Bell came back. And I was curious if you had any opinions about whether his coming back to the team, maybe they've been able to run more and be more effective running the ball to make life easier on the rest of the offense. Has that sort of been true in your eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, some of that is Vic. We've always written in the past about how having a mobile quarterback opens things up a little bit for the running game, and running games tend to do a little bit better because you have that fear of the bootleg, fear of the option, that kind of thing. But the overall running game is better this year for the Steelers. They were 12th in run DVOA last year. They're 3rd this year, for a couple of reasons. One being that, as great as Bell was last year, a lot of his value was as a receiver. He's running a little bit better since he came back. More importantly, last year there was just him.
Right.
This year, D'Angelo Williams was really good in those first couple games, and he's been good in a couple of carries. So much that Healy, offensive coordinator, has gone away from his previous rule of backup running back must get exactly 1 carry per game and no more. As far as the passing game goes, listen, man, I mean, the fact is that backup quarterbacks are not as good as starters, but they still have the same talent around them. So the Steelers' passing DVOA was 35% in weeks 1 through 3. 3% in weeks 4 through 6, and it would be worse if you only looked at Vic, because some of that is Landry Jones's really unexpected 8 for 12 performance against the Cardinals. But what it does help show there is when you've got the good offensive line, when you've got great receivers and Bell in the backfield, that even the backup quarterbacks are going to be average because the talent around them is good.
it's kind of scary to imagine how good that offense might become when Roethlisberger comes back. Finally, having Antonio Brown and a sophomore Martavis Bryant able to play both together at the same time, they could just be really dangerous offensively.
Yeah. I mean, I'll point out also that right now the top offenses in the league have generally all played among the easiest schedules in the league so far. Some of that is because of the fact that the opponent adjustments aren't at 100% yet. But the Steelers are the exception. The Steelers have actually played a harder than average schedule of opposing defenses. They've had 3 games against teams that are in the top 8 of defense. Their schedule gets easier the rest of the way, and they do have those skill players back, although obviously it's a problem now that Kelvin Beachum, the left tackle, is out for the year, I believe, and it looks like Marquise Pouncey, because of an infection, may not come back from the broken leg at midseason. He also may be done for the year. So you have to kind of balance out the offensive line questions with the return of Martavis Bryant. But overall, I think that the Steelers are set up to be a great offense. Maybe not as great as they would be if the whole offensive line was healthy, but a great offense over the second half of the year.
So obviously that makes the Steelers a very dangerous team come playoff time if they can maintain this level of average success with the defense. I mean, something that we didn't really expect coming into the year. So let's talk a little bit about that defense. I have some thoughts here, but I wanted to get your perspective about where they stand in terms of, pass defense, rush defense, et cetera, in terms of DVOA.
Well, the front seven has been strong, right? So overall, the run defense is where they're really at so far. They're 5th in run defense. They're 18th in pass defense. The front seven's been really strong. They rank 11th in both adjusted sack rate and adjusted line yards. Timmons is playing really well. As usual, Stephen Tuitt has been kind of a breakout player at defensive end. The kind of the 5 technique, 3-4 defensive end position. Yep. Shazier is playing better at linebacker. The inside linebackers, Shazier and Spence. So those have all been improvements on defense that have really helped them to be average on defense.
I was surprised, but probably shouldn't have been because of the success they've been having. But the Steelers actually lead the NFL in pressures plus sacks generated. They have 51. That's actually 7 more than even the Broncos. So they're a little bit ahead of the pack there. And, you're right. Tuitt's the one he's had 7 so far. Cameron Hayward's had 8. The biggest surprise to me was actually James Harrison has 12. That's tied for the second most in football behind, obviously, J.J. Watt. So he's a little bit found the fountain of youth, really fitting back nicely into that 3-4 defense.
Yeah, so I guess he scared Father Time away and convinced him to go visit Peyton Manning instead.
Yeah, Father Time doesn't want to have any participation trophies or anything along those lines for sure. But I do think the Steelers' good pressure that they're generating is somewhat overcompensating, I guess you could say, for some limitations in their secondary. And one of the things that I was looking at here was basically completion rates allowed, or I was looking at completions plus drops divided by targets going against certain cornerbacks. And Antoine Blake in particular has been pretty poor by that measurement. He's allowed 75% of the targets coming his way to go for a completion or a drop, which is just 59th of 66 defensive backs that have seen 20 or more targets so far this year. So he's been the real weak link, I would say. But William Gay has been pretty strong, 14th overall in that metric. So the pass rush needs to be effective, I think, to overcome some of the deficiencies they have in the secondary.
Yeah, Gay is a good guy to have on your team. He's a guy who plays a role. He's a really good guy to have as your second cornerback, even better as your third cornerback. He's really stretched as your number 1 cornerback, right? I mean, he would be his role would fit a lot more if he was playing, for the Jets or something where he could be on the other side from Revis than it is in Pittsburgh where he has to be the top guy. But he's still playing reasonable. Yeah, Blake's been a problem. There's no doubt about it.
And speaking of Revis, just to give everyone a little bit of a sense on how that metric works, considering probably haven't had exposure to it, the guys that you would expect to be near the top of the list generally are. For instance, Revis was 3rd, Patrick Peterson 5th, Tyrann Mathieu was 6th. Interestingly, Richard Sherman was only 49th, and in previous years, he and Darrelle Revis have been basically way ahead of the pack in that measurement. So perhaps finding something there, yeah.
I think we know there have been some pretty clear coverage errors going on in Seattle, and I'm guessing that's where some of that comes in, is there have been some plays, like the one that lost them the game this week, where not everybody is on the same page as far as what coverage they're playing, and that leads to open men.
Exactly. And now that you brought that up, I think it's a good time to move on to the second topic, because we wanted to talk a little bit about both the Carolina Panthers, the team that went to Seattle and won last week, and also the Denver Broncos. Both of those teams continue to be undefeated on the season. They're two of the 5 teams that are undefeated. So all the talk that we've been giving to the potential for having an undefeated team throughout the season, it continues to be a real possibility. But speaking with Carolina and Denver specifically, I think everyone was generally in agreement that Carolina was the worst undefeated team. And they actually got their signature win going to Seattle for that. Meanwhile, Denver showing basically this crazy split of being the number 1 defense in DVOA, but the number 32 offense. So I think my general question to you that can sort of be the springboard for a lot of different topics here is, do you still think Carolina is the worst of those 5 undefeated teams, or is Denver the worst?
Right now, I think Denver is the worst, because at a certain point, we have to kind of stop expecting that Peyton Manning is coming back, that the old Peyton Manning is coming back. I mean, we have to kind of keep waiting for it. Like, he's not likely to be this bad the whole year, but we got to stop waiting for the old Peyton Manning to come back, because it is not coming back. And I would rather have a team that's more balanced than a team that's all defense. And the DVOA ratings have Carolina slightly ahead of Denver. Carolina's 10th right now, Denver 11th. But Carolina is balanced, right? They're 11th on offense, 5th defense. Denver is so imbalanced. It's really ridiculous. I did go and look in the past. There were a couple of teams that were undefeated with below average offense after 6 games in the past. 2 other teams have been like that. The 1991 Saints, who were 21st in offense and 6-0, and the 2013 Chiefs, who were 18th in offense and 6-0. Both of those teams were number 1 in defense the way the Broncos are. But certainly, especially that Chiefs team kind of folded up over the second half of the season a bit. The success didn't last without enough offense, and those teams were far better in offense than this Broncos team is. I mean, there's a big difference between 21st and dead last. Teams just do not do this over a whole season, right? The latest that we've ever had a team who were first in defense and last in offense was the 1992 Seahawks. It's really close. In week 16, they were first in defense and 28th in offense. That was dead last at that point. Mm-hmm. And they ended up falling to 3rd in defense by the end of the year. One more game. The 2004 Dolphins more recently were also dead last in offense and first in defense. But the difference with them was that team was winless instead of undefeated because their offense was 55% below average and their defense was only 24% better than average, as opposed to Denver, where the strength of the defense, which is at minus 31, is better than the weakness of the offense, which is minus 28. And, minus being better for defenses, so minus 31% for defense is a very strong defense at this point. It's really rare to have this kind of a split. The 2005 Bears were close to that for a full season. They were number 1 in defense, 28th in offense. That was the team that ended up marching out like Chad Hutchinson and Craig Krenzel at quarterback. The 99 and 2003 Ravens were 27th in offense and first in defense, but it's never been like this for a whole year. And I don't think it's going to be like this for the whole year for Denver either, but they're clearly, it's going to be pretty hard to go on a big Super Bowl run with one of, if not the worst offense in the league.
It seems so strange to me because of all the skill position talent they have, but I guess, Peyton's play is really dragging it down. But, maybe they'll figure it out too, because it does seem like at least Ronnie Hillman's been a little bit more effective in the zone blocking scheme of late. And so maybe they're starting to figure a few things out. But the really funny thing to me is just considering the fact that in this argument, the Panthers are the team that's the more balanced, because it really was not something that I would have expected going into the year. Obviously, they have players like Kuechly and Josh Norman on defense, the players that you would expect to be carrying the team. But offensively, they have so few strong pieces. And it's really, I feel like, just Cam that's been carrying them through. his ability to, generate first downs on third down runs is it's such an equalizer when they're, trotting out Ted Ginn Jr. as their number one receiver and they have all those other problems there. Let's talk a little bit about the Panthers special teams too, because that doesn't really where the balance extends to, because the Panthers are the number 30 team in special teams. And there's one play in particular that stands out in my mind, which was when they were playing the Saints, a team that they were probably expected to pretty easily handle without Drew Brees there, because he was hurt that game and Luke McCown was starting. But they allowed a punt return touchdown, and it was actually a really weird sequence where they stopped a guy on a punt within the 5-yard line, but had committed a penalty and so had to re-kick, and everyone was exhausted, and basically it's kind of like what you would expect from that situation. And so to me, that seemed a little bit like a flukish play, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how much would one bad play like that, a play that I might not consider to be something that would, be foretelling of their style of special teams play going forward, how much is that one play contributing to the Panthers' really poor special teams rating in DVOA?
Yeah, there's no question that it does contribute a bit more than it probably should. One of the sort of to-dos on the big to-do list when I overhaul special teams at some point is going to be to blunt the importance of the really long touchdown returns in the same way that we blunt the importance of the really long touchdown runs and passes in offense defense, because, at a certain point, there's not that much difference between a 60-yard punt return and an 80-yard punt return. They're both spectacular, but that the fact that you got an extra 20 yards doesn't necessarily indicate that the return team is going to be that good in the future.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. Nortman has had some problems. He's he hasn't been very good pinning guys inside the 20. The other problem for their special teams has been on field goals, where Graham Gano's had 2 field goals blocked and a third missed, plus a missed extra point. Although I will point out that one of the blocks and the missed field goal were both from 53 yards. So they were hurt as much by that as you might think. It's interesting, I will say also about Carolina. First of all, the passing game is just not that impressive. It's so much Greg Olsen. The whole Funchess thing has yet to happen. They're 4th in offensive running and 22nd passing the ball, but because they've been kind of run heavy, that ended up working out to 11th overall. I'm also going to point out, it's interesting that it looks a little nuts that we have Philadelphia and Buffalo at 3-3 and Seattle at 2-4, currently ranked above both Carolina and Denver, who are undefeated. So I will point out that if you look at the non-adjusted number, Carolina and Denver rank 6th and 7th at that point. The only teams with losses that rank ahead of them are the Jets and the Cardinals. The reason for that is the schedules. Carolina's played the easiest schedule in the league so far. Denver's is 27th. So, they've beaten up some bad teams. And the other is fumble recoveries. The Denver defense has caused 9 fumbles and recovered 6 of them. The Carolina defense has caused 3 fumbles and recovered all 3 of them. So that's likely to even out a little bit more over the course of the season. But both of those teams are playing well, but golly, it sure is a difference between Carolina playing better than you expected before the season and Denver, which just looks like they're playing so much worse despite the record.
Or so much differently, at least, than you would have expected entering this season.
Yeah, I don't want to upset Von Miller with whatever he went on some screed early this week about, no one's paying attention to our defense. Oh, geez, Von, I'm sorry about the countless articles we're writing about how you have the best defense in the league. Clearly, we're not writing enough of those.
Well, the one that stuns me the most, really, is what you mentioned about Philadelphia, the fact that they've actually snuck up ahead of those teams in DVOA. And I want to get to that next. But before I do that, let me remind everyone again that the Off the Charts Football Podcast is presented to you by FantasyInsiders.com, your source for daily fantasy sports content. They believe that accuracy matters, and it shows in that they've won the daily fantasy accuracy competition for the last 3 years running. If you're serious about DFS or want to become serious, go to FantasyInsiders.com and get your free educational content and look at premium memberships. So, Aaron, Carolina is actually hosting Philadelphia this week, and I feel like that game might tell us a little bit about all of this, but I was stunned to find Philadelphia 7th in DVOA. It might just be sort of the talk shows all being completely on this about how bad their offensive has been, how bad Chip Kelly's offseason moves as a GM have been, how bad Sam Bradford has looked. But the thing that really stands out to me is how strong they've been defensively, especially because they're third in DVOA on defense. And I'm wondering, maybe we've gotten a little bit carried away. Is Philadelphia actually a team that's this good? Or I'm curious, is it possible that the NFC East is kind of bad, and the wins they're getting against each other, these close competitive games, they're sort of inflating their DVOA so far this season?
As far as the latter, I do not think that that is true. I went and I looked, thinking we were going to talk about Philadelphia and the division that they are in. I went and I looked at the games for the NFC East outside of the division and the games for the AFC South outside of their division, and which one is the worst division in football. And there is no contest. The average DVOA rating of NFC East teams in non-division games this year is 3.7%. And remember, Dallas has been without Romo and Bryant in all three of the non-division games. So that rating would likely be higher if those guys had been healthy.
For sure.
The average DVOA of AFC South teams in non-division games is minus 19.6%.
Wow.
The AFC South has had only one game where one of its teams has gone over 40% in a single game this year against outside of the division, and that was Tennessee in week 1 against Tampa Bay, with 3 games where they've been under minus 40. Houston against Kansas City, Houston week 4 against Atlanta, and Jacksonville week 3 against New England. The NFC East only has 1 game under minus 40, which is Dallas against New England. And they have 3, the opposite. They have 3 over 40. Philadelphia against the Jets week 3, Philadelphia against the Saints week 5, and Washington week 2 against St. Louis. So there's no question, no doubt, it's not even close. The NFC East is a much better division than the AFC South and looks more mediocre because they've been playing each other rather than because they, play each other, they look better. It's the opposite. We actually now have Philadelphia 7, the Giants 12, Washington 15. So 3 NFC East teams are in the top half of the league right now. The division is really not that bad. It's not great. There's no great teams, but it's not that bad.
And that actually does make sense in why Philadelphia is 7th in DVOA. In addition to beating the Giants handily this week, you're right. They did beat the Jets on the road. They played the Falcons really close. Another team DVOA has liked most of the season. So I get that. But you're going to have to explain to me how they've been so good on defense, because with the personnel, I'm not really sure I see it. The big marquee free agent acquisition, Byron Maxwell, coming in from Seattle, he hasn't been very good as the number 1 corner. He's actually been right next to Antoine Blake, in fact, allowing 74% completion percentage heading his way. And they're sort of middle of the pack in pass rush. So I'm not really sure where the blue chip players are here that are sort of driving this defensive success.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, everything that you've heard about them is kind of true about the offense. Like, Bradford's been kind of lousy, and the offense has done some weird things and made some weird choices. And it doesn't help that their worst game of the year by far was on mostly national television in week 2 when they lost to Dallas. But the fact is they've been really inconsistent. They've been really good in 3 of the last 4 games, though. And, we kind of, they whipped the Saints. The Saints are bad. But, they didn't beat the Saints close. They whipped them.
Yeah.
And the defense has just been really good. They're 9th in adjusted line yards. They're 10th in adjusted sack rate. So it's been strong in the front overall, not, spectacular, but good and balanced. And while Maxwell's been awful, the pass defense is 10th against number 2 receivers and in the top 5 against number 3 receivers and tight ends and running backs in the passing game. So, they've kind of been a really good all-around defense without stars. Fletcher Cox is the closest, I think, to a star. He's had some really outstanding games. They don't really create stats because he's a 5 tech and a 3-4 defense, and those guys don't generally pick up lots of stats. Another guy who you might be surprised is Walter Thurmond, been moved from cornerback to safety, has 9 defeats so far this year, which is, among the top guys in the league. So the fact that they're doing this despite the injuries at inside linebacker is surprising. But they're doing it. Even with Maxwell struggling, even with the injuries to Kendricks and Keiko Alonso, the defense is playing really, really well. And I do think it starts up front with Cox and with Benny Logan, the nose tackle.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're kind of perfectly positioned to play the Panthers then. If there's any team you can have sort of a weakness against number one wide receivers, but then have strength against depth and strength against receiving running backs, the Panthers is the team to match up against. So I feel like the Sunday night, if they play well and beat the Panthers in Carolina, that might get people off Chip's back, at least for a little while.
I think if they win over an undefeated team, that will look really good. But I don't know if it will get people off Chip's back, because the Carolina defense is 5th in the league. And the Carolina defense is 3rd against the pass and 18th against the run, which means Sam Bradford is going to throw picks. Right? So, they could win, and maybe he'll finally DeMarco Murray will have another big game, so that'll be 2 in a row. But will it get people off of Chip's back if Bradford throws 3 picks in a win? I don't know.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, I'm looking forward to watching. I know that. And looks like there's a couple of other interesting games this weekend, even though several of the other undefeated teams are on bye. But that just means we can talk more undefeated teams next week, Aaron.
I want to put it out there. The game that people should, I know it sounds ridiculous to say that the Patriots and a team from New York are not getting enough attention, but Patriots Jets, that I will be there for Patriots Jets at Gillette Stadium, 1:00 Eastern on Sunday, is a huge game.
Yes.
The Jets are the number 1 team right now in among one-loss teams, I guess, since Arizona has 2 losses. They're the number 5 team in DVOA. They are actually above average in offense, despite the fact that their quarterback is not that good, because they've had insane offensive line play and the addition of Brandon Marshall and great play from Chris Ivory. They're number 2 in defense. This is a huge test. This is a much bigger test for the Patriots going undefeated than the Colts were last week, even though the Colts game was on the road. It is absolutely possible. Not only is it absolutely possible for Philadelphia to beat Carolina, it is absolutely possible for the Patriots to lose to the Jets, and we could, really see battering to the lineup of undefeated teams between this week and next.
Yeah, I wouldn't at all be surprised if the Patriots-Jets matchup was a preview of the AFC title game. So I'm definitely going to be looking forward to watching that one as well.
Although I will, in their defense, I will point out who would be really surprised if, well, I guess they would be Bengals fans, but they probably expect to lose in the playoffs anyway. But maybe to the Pittsburgh Steelers, so maybe I should say Steelers fans would be surprised if that was a preview of the AFC Championship game. But I think with Rex Ryan in Buffalo now and quiet Todd Bowles, it's really getting kind of underplayed what a big game this is, because the Jets have been so good this year.
Well, we'll probably need to talk about that next week, assuming the game goes to that script, as opposed to maybe a Patriots blowout or anything along those lines. So everyone look forward to that. And I encourage everyone to subscribe to our show. It's available on iTunes. Check out footballoutsiders.com. Also check out fantasyinsiders.com, our sponsor. We appreciate it if you do. Aaron, I think that pretty much wraps up everything we wanted to talk about. So I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Let's hit some big games this week, and we'll talk next week. And if we're both lucky, our teams will both still be undefeated.
All right.
It's going to be tough.
Hoping for it. All right, Aaron, I'll talk to you later.